tonight, return with me to the very beginning, long before kings, long before empires, when the first stories of gods and humans were carved into clay. Close your eyes, slow your breath, and let the noise of the day drift away. Because this is the tale of the Anunnaki, the ancient ones who shaped destinies, built worlds, and watched humanity rise. Their legends whisper through forgotten tablets, waiting for someone willing to listen in the quiet of night. So lie down, get comfortable. And if you enjoy journeys like this, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let the story begin. In the beginning, before the beginning, there was only the vast cosmic ocean, the primordial waters of Namu, deep and endless and utterly alone. In that infinite darkness, in that timeless void, there was potential, there was possibility, but there was not yet existence as we know it. From these cosmic waters, the first beings emerged, not created, but self-generated, coming into existence because the universe required it, because nothing cannot remain nothing forever. First came An, whose name means sky, or heaven. An was consciousness itself, the principle of height, of above, of the vault of heaven that would one day stretch over all things. An was vast and distant, powerful beyond comprehension, eternal and unchanging. Then came Kai, whose name means earth. Ki was the foundation, the principle of below, the substance from which all solid things would be formed. Where An was height, Ki was depth. Where An was air and space, Kai was matter and ground. These two primordial beings, An and Kai, sky and earth, came together in the cosmic waters. And from their union, the first generation of gods was born. These were the great gods, the elder gods, the ones who would shape reality itself. Among their children were the three who would rule creation: Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag. Enlil, lord of the air, the wind, the storm, and the space between heaven and earth. Enlil was power incarnate, the executive of the divine council, the one who made decisions and ensured they were carried out. His voice was thunder. His breath was the wind that could bring life-giving rain or devastating hurricanes. Enki, lord of the sweet waters beneath the earth, the Abzu, the source of wisdom and magic and craft. Enki was clever, creative, and kind to the creatures that would come to inhabit the world. He was a maker, a solver of problems, a keeper of secrets and sacred knowledge. Ninhursag, the great mother, lady of the mountain, goddess of birth and fertility. She was the life-giver, the nurturer, the one who would help shape living things from clay and breath. These three, along with An, formed the supreme council of the gods, but they were not alone in creation, for they had other siblings, children, and descendants. The divine family grew, and with each generation the universe became more complex, more defined, more real. And among all these divine beings there emerged a group known as the Anunnaki, the great gods of heaven and earth, the children of An, the ones who would descend from the celestial realms to do the work of creation. Take a deep breath. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort. The story is just beginning. In the time before time was measured, heaven and earth were not yet separated. They existed together, merged, united. The cosmic mountain rose from the primordial waters, but there was no space between its peak and its base. All was potential, nothing was actualized. Then Enlil, lord of the air, took his great powers and separated An and Ki. He pushed heaven upward and pressed earth downward, creating the space between, the atmosphere, the realm where living things could exist. This was the first great act of creation, the first ordering of chaos into cosmos. With space now existing between heaven and earth, the work of creation could truly begin. Enki looked at the new earth and saw that it was empty. The sweet waters beneath, the Abzu, contained all the potential for life, but nothing yet lived. So Enki, in his wisdom, began to organize the world. He established the rivers, causing them to flow with fresh water from the mountains to the sea. He created the marshlands where reeds would grow tall and green. He defined the boundaries between salt water and sweet, between land and sea. He placed fish in the waters and declared them good. Enki then created the first plants. From the earth, green things grew, barley and wheat, date palms and apple trees, vegetables and herbs. The earth became a garden, rich with growing things, though not yet with any creature to tend it. The other gods watched and contributed their own gifts to creation. Nanna created the moon, silver and perfect, to mark the passage of time. Utu created the sun, golden and warm, to give light and heat. Inanna became the morning star and evening star, Venus brilliant in the twilight. The world was taking shape. But it was still empty of the ones who would till the soil, build the cities, sing the songs, and offer praise to those who had made it all. The gods looked at their creation and saw that it was good, but it was incomplete. Something was missing. Someone was needed to do the work, to maintain the irrigation canals, to grow the food, to serve in the temples. The gods themselves did not wish to toil. They were divine, eternal, meant for higher purposes, and so, in their wisdom, or perhaps in their need, they conceived of a new kind of being, something between the divine and the earthly, mortal yet conscious, limited yet capable. They would create humankind. Let your body relax completely now. Feel yourself drifting as the story continues. The great gods gathered in assembly to discuss the matter of creation. They met in Nippur, in the temple of Enlil, where the decisions that shape the world were made. "We have created a beautiful world," they said to one another, "but who will maintain it? Who will dig the canals that bring water to the fields? Who will plant the grain and harvest it? Who will tend the date palms and press the oil? This work is beneath us, yet it must be done." The younger gods, the Igigi, who had been doing this work, were tired. They had laboured for thousands of years, digging, building, carrying. They came before the great gods with their tools and their complaints. "We are divine beings," the Igigi said, "yet we labour like servants. We are exhausted. We can bear this burden no longer." Enlil was angry at this rebellion, but Enki, wise and compassionate, proposed a solution. "Let us create a new being," Enki said, "a creature who can do this work, who is made for it. We will take clay from the earth itself and we will shape it. We will give it enough intelligence to understand tasks, enough strength to complete them, enough of our essence to make it conscious. But it will be mortal, limited, bound to the earth. It will serve, and in serving, it will give the world purpose." The gods agreed. This was a wise solution. They would create something new, something that had never existed before. Humanity. Enki descended to the Abzu, to the sweet waters beneath the earth where his powers were strongest. Ninhursag came with him, for this was an act of birth as much as creation, and she was the mother goddess, the one who understood the mysteries of life. They took clay from the earth, red clay, rich clay, the very substance of the ground itself. Enki shaped it with his hands, forming a figure in the image of the gods, upright, two-armed, two-legged, with a face that could look upward to heaven rather than down at the ground like the animals. But the clay figure was lifeless. It was form without substance, potential without actuality. Then came the sacred moment. Enki took the blood of a god, or Ilu, the god who had wisdom, and mixed it with the clay. The divine essence merged with the earthly matter. Ninhursag breathed into the figure, giving it the breath of life. And the first human opened their eyes. The gods looked at what they had made and saw that it was good. This being could think, could learn, could work. It was not divine, but it carried a spark of the divine within it. It was mortal, but it was conscious. It was limited, but within those limits, it had the freedom to choose, to create, to grow. But one human was not enough. The work of the world required many hands. So Enki and Ninhursag created more, 7 males and 7 females at first, and then more and more, until humans began to spread across the earth. The gods taught these first humans what they needed to know. Enki taught them agriculture, how to plant seeds and harvest grain, how to irrigate the fields and make the desert bloom. He taught them crafts, how to weave cloth and shape pottery, how to build houses from reeds and mud brick. Ninhursag taught them about birth and family, about caring for children and building communities. The other gods each contributed their knowledge. Humanity learned to domesticate animals, to brew beer, to bake bread, to work metal, to write, to count, to measure time by the movements of the moon and stars. And in return for these gifts, humanity served. They dug the irrigation canals that made the land fertile. They built the great temples where the gods could dwell among mortals. They grew food and offered the first fruits as sacrifices. They praised the gods in songs and prayers. The world found its balance. The gods ruled from their temples, eternal and powerful. Humans lived and worked and died, generation after generation, mortal but meaningful. For a time, there was harmony. Breathe slowly. Let the story wash over you like a gentle tide. There is no hurry. The ancient tale unfolds at its own pace. The first city built by humans, according to the ancient tablets, was Eridu. It rose from the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the sweet waters and the salt waters meet, where the earth is rich and black and fertile. Eridu was the city of Enki. His temple stood at its centre, the Iabzu, the house of the cosmic waters. This was the holiest place in the world, the point where heaven, earth, and the waters below met and merged. In Eridu, the Anunnaki walked among humans more freely than anywhere else. The boundary between divine and mortal was thinner here. The gods could be seen in their temples, or so the people believed. Their presence could be felt in every breeze, every ripple in the canal waters. Enki governed Eridu with wisdom and care. He ensured the canals flowed properly, the fields produced abundant crops, the people lived in peace. He taught the humans who lived there the secrets of civilization, writing, mathematics, law, medicine. Eridu became the model for all cities that would follow. The people of Eridu lived good lives. They woke each morning to the sun rising over the marshes. They worked in the fields and workshops, producing food and goods. In the evenings, they gathered to share meals, tell stories, sing songs. They married and had children. They grew old and died and were buried with care. And always they honoured the gods who had made them and who protected them. But Eridu was only the first. Other cities soon followed. Uruk was built in honour of An, the sky god, and later became the city of Inanna, goddess of love and war. Its walls were mighty, its temples magnificent. The great king Gilgamesh would later rule there, performing deeds that would echo through eternity. Rose near the sea, a city of merchants and sailors, sacred to Nanna, the moon god. Its ziggurat reached toward the heavens, a mountain made by human hands. Nippur became the religious centre, the city of Enlil. Here the divine assembly met. Here the fates of kingdoms were decided. A king could not truly rule Sumer without the blessing given in Nippur's temple. Lagash, Kish, Shuruppak, Adab, city after city rose from the fertile plain. Each had its patron deity, its own character, its own glory. The land between the rivers became a constellation of urban centres, connected by canals and trade routes, by shared language and shared gods. The Anunnaki divided the world among themselves. Each took responsibility for certain aspects of creation, certain cities, certain domains. Enki governed the sweet waters and magic. Enlil commanded the storms and held executive power. Ninhursag presided over birth and the mountains. Nanna ruled the moon and time's passage. Utu governed the sun and justice. Inanna held sway over love, war, and the morning star. There were dozens of gods, perhaps hundreds, each with their own personality. their own desires, their own relationships with the others. They loved and fought, made alliances and rivalries, just as humans did, but on a cosmic scale, with the power to reshape reality itself. And humanity, growing more numerous with each generation, served them all. The cities flourished, civilization expanded, the world entered an age of wonder. But not all was harmonious among the gods, for they, like humans, had their own conflicts, their own ambitions, their own capacity for anger and jealousy. Let your mind drift now like a boat on still water as the story takes a darker turn. Though the Anunnaki had divided the world among themselves, peace between them was not always assured. Gods have personalities, desires, egos. They compete for worship, for power, for honour. Enlil, stern and authoritarian, believed in order above all else. His word was law, his decisions final. He had little patience for chaos or rebellion. Enki, by contrast, was flexible and creative. He believed in solving problems through cleverness rather than force. He had great affection for humanity, seeing them as his finest creation, and he often interceded on their behalf. These two great gods, brothers and rivals, often found themselves at odds. Inanna was ambitious and bold, never content with the status she had. She wanted more power, more worship, more domains to rule. She would scheme and seduce, fight and negotiate, doing whatever necessary to increase her influence. The gods had their own dramas, their own stories. They married and divorced. They had children who inherited their powers and domains. They competed in contests of strength or wit. They made pacts and broke them, and sometimes their conflicts affected the mortal world below. There is a story told on ancient tablets of a time when Inanna went down to the underworld, the realm of her sister Ereshkigal. The underworld was a dark place, a place of no return, where the dead went to exist as shadows. Ereshkigal ruled there, queen of the land of dust and darkness. Inanna descended through 7 gates, and at each gate she had to remove one of her divine powers, her crown, her jewels, her royal garments, piece by piece, until she stood naked and powerless before her sister. Ereshkigal, angry at Inanna's presumption in coming to her realm, killed her sister and hung her corpse on a hook. With Inanna dead, the world above changed. Fertility ceased. Plants stopped growing. Animals stopped mating. The world began to die. The gods realized something was terribly wrong. Enki, ever resourceful, created 2 beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, creatures that were neither male nor female, neither living nor dead. These creatures descended to the underworld and through trickery and flattery convinced Ereshkigal to release Inanna. But there was a price. The laws of the underworld demanded that no one could leave without providing a substitute. Someone had to take Inanna's place. When Inanna returned to the surface, she found her husband Dumuzi sitting on her throne, dressed in her finery, seemingly unconcerned about her absence. In her fury, she decreed that he would be her substitute. Thus Dumuzi was dragged to the underworld, but his sister, who loved him dearly, volunteered to take his place for half the year. So it was arranged. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld and half above. When he was below, the world entered the dry season, the time of heat and death. When he returned, vegetation bloomed again, the wet season, the time of growth and life. This myth explained the seasons, but it also illustrated the complex relationships between the gods: love and betrayal, power and vulnerability, death and rebirth. The Anunnaki were not simple beings. They were as complex as the humans who worshipped them, perhaps more so. They made mistakes. They acted out of emotion. They were not omniscient or omnipotent despite their great powers, and their greatest conflict was yet to come, a decision that would nearly destroy everything they had created. Your breathing is slow and steady now. Your body is completely relaxed. Let the story continue to unfold. Generations passed. Humans grew more numerous. What had begun with those first 14, created by Enki and Ninhursag, had become thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The cities expanded. New cities were founded. The land between the rivers became densely populated, alive with human activity. Humans were busy, energetic, creative. They built bigger temples, dug longer canals, planted more fields. They developed new technologies, the wheel, the plough, the sail, the arch. They created art and music. They wrote poetry and kept records. They made laws and waged wars. The noise of humanity rose up to heaven, the sounds of their work, their voices, their celebrations, their conflicts. Millions of humans now, all talking, singing, shouting, praying, crying. And in the heavens Enlil found he could not sleep. The lord of the air, the executive of the gods, lay in his temple in Nippur and listened to the cacophony rising from below. The constant noise, the endless activity, it grated on his nerves. He had created humanity to serve, but now they seemed out of control, too numerous, too loud, too chaotic. Enlil called a council of the gods. Humanity has become too numerous, he declared. They multiply like locusts. Their noise prevents me from resting. Something must be done. The gods debated what action to take. Some suggested reducing human lifespans. Others proposed limiting their fertility. These measures were implemented, but humans continued to multiply. Enlil's frustration grew. He sent drought to reduce their numbers. The fields dried up, crops failed, people starved. But the survivors endured, and when the rains returned, they multiplied again. He sent plagues, diseases that swept through the cities, killing thousands. Again humanity suffered, but again they recovered and continued to grow. Finally Enlil made a terrible decision. "I will send a flood," he announced. "A great deluge that will cover the entire earth. Humanity will be washed away. We will start over, perhaps with a smaller, quieter population, or perhaps we will simply be done with them entirely." The gods agreed, all except Enki. Enki, who had created humanity, who had taught them civilization, who loved them as a parent loves their children, could not accept this judgment. But he had sworn an oath not to warn the humans directly, so he found another way. Let yourself drift deeper into sleep as we come to the most famous story of the Anunnaki. In the city of Shuruppak there lived a man named Utnapishtim. He was a righteous man, a king, a priest, beloved by his people. He worshipped the gods faithfully and lived according to their laws. Utnapishtim did not know that the gods had decided to destroy humanity. He went about his daily life, governing his city, making offerings in the temple, returning each evening to his home and his wife. One night, as he slept, Utnapishtim heard a voice. It seemed to come from the reed wall of his house, speaking in whispers. "Wall," the voice said, "Wall, listen to me. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubatutu, tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon possessions and seek life. Spurn property, save life. Take aboard the boat the seed of all living things." The voice gave him precise instructions, the dimensions of the boat, how to construct it, how to seal it with pitch, what to bring aboard. Utnapishtim woke, terrified and confused, but he recognized the voice as belonging to Enki, and he knew the god would not speak thus without reason. The next day, Utnapishtim told his people he was building a boat. They laughed at him. Why would anyone build a massive ship in the middle of a city far from the sea? But Utnapishtim persisted. He gathered wood and pitch. He hired craftsmen. He began construction. The boat was enormous, as large as a small city block with multiple decks, divided into compartments, sealed completely. It took years to build, and all that time people mocked him. When it was finished, Utnapishtim did as the voice had commanded. He brought aboard his family, his wife, his children, his children's families. He invited artisans of every kind, carpenters, potters, metalworkers, weavers. people who knew the skills necessary for civilization. He brought animals, both wild and domestic, male and female of each kind. He brought seeds and grain, tools and supplies. Then the rains began. At first, it was just a heavy rain, the kind that sometimes fell in the wet season, but it did not stop. It rained all through the day and into the night. It rained the next day and the next and the next. The rivers rose, the canals overflowed, the fields flooded. Water began creeping into the streets of the cities. People ran to the temples, begging the gods to stop the rain. But the temples themselves began to flood. The priests fled to higher ground, carrying what sacred objects they could. The water continued to rise. Utnapishtim and his family sealed themselves inside the boat. They heard the screams outside as the water claimed more and more of the city. They heard people pounding on the hull, begging to be let in. But the boat was sealed, and there was no room for more. The boat began to float, lifted by the rising waters. It drifted from Shurapak, carried by the flood. Around them they could see the tops of buildings disappearing beneath the waves. The great ziggurats, the temples that had reached toward heaven, now sank below the surface. For 6 days and 7 nights the storm raged. The rain fell without ceasing. The winds howled. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the heavens themselves. Even the gods were frightened by what they had unleashed. They huddled in the highest heaven, watching the destruction below. And some of them began to regret what they had done. Ninhursag wept, seeing her children, humanity, being destroyed. "How could I agree to this?" she cried. "How could I allow my own creations to be killed?" Other gods joined her lament. They had not truly understood what it would mean to destroy humanity, to erase all those cities, all that civilization, all those individual lives, each with its own hopes and dreams and loves. Enlil alone remained unmoved. He had made his decision, and he would not reverse it. Humanity had been too numerous, too loud. This was necessary. On the 7th day the rain stopped. The winds ceased. The sky cleared. An eerie silence fell over the world. The boat floated on an endless ocean. In every direction there was nothing but water. No land, no cities, no life. Just the boat, carrying its precious cargo of survivors, drifting alone in a drowned world. Days passed. Utnapishtim opened a window and looked out, hoping to see land. There was none. He sent out a dove to search for dry ground, but it returned, having found nowhere to land. He waited and sent out a swallow. It too returned. Finally he sent out a raven. The raven flew away and did not come back. It had found land. Somewhere the waters were receding. More days passed. At last the boat struck something, solid ground. It had come to rest on the peak of a mountain, Mount Nimush, one of the few places high enough to emerge from the flood. Utnapishtim opened the boat and stepped out onto the mountain. Below, the waters still covered everything, but here, at least, was solid ground. He built an altar from stones. He made an offering to the gods, the first sacrifice in the new world. He burned aromatic woods, and the smoke rose up to heaven. The gods smelled the sweet savour and gathered around it. They had missed the offerings of humanity. They had missed the worship, the songs, the prayers. The world without humans was empty, purposeless. The sweet savour, they said to one another. The sacrifice. It is good. But then Enlil arrived and saw the boat and the survivors. How did any human escape, he thundered. The destruction was meant to be complete. Enki stepped forward. I did not directly warn the humans, he said carefully. I merely spoke to the wall of a house. If someone overheard and took action, how is that my fault? Enlil was furious, but what could he do? The flood was past. Humanity had survived, if barely. And the other gods were clearly relieved that all had not been lost. Finally Enlil's anger cooled. He approached Utnapishtim and his wife. You have survived the flood through your righteousness and the cleverness of Enki, Enlil said. You cannot return to the world of mortals. You have seen too much, experienced too much. You shall become like us." He touched them, and they were transformed. Utnapishtim and his wife became immortal, like the gods themselves. But they could not remain in the mortal world. Enlil placed them far away, at the mouth of the rivers, at the edge of the world, where they would live forever in peace. And as for the world itself, the waters receded, the land emerged, mud and silt and emptiness. But life returned. The survivors on the boat came down from the mountain. They began again, planting, building, having children. Humanity had survived its greatest trial. The gods had learned that they could not simply destroy what they had made, and a new world, a second world, began. Your mind is quiet now, your body is at peace. The story continues, gentle as a lullaby. The world after the flood was different from the world before. The cities had to be rebuilt from ruins, the canals had to be redug, the fields had to be replanted. It was hard work, but humans were resilient. The great gods looked down and saw their creations beginning again, and they made a decision. There would be rules now, clear laws to govern the relationship between divine and mortal. They would limit human lifespans. No longer would people live for hundreds of years as they had before the flood. Now, a human life would be measured in decades, not centuries. This would keep the population from growing too quickly. They would establish kingship as the proper form of government. Kings would rule in the gods' names, acting as intermediaries between heaven and earth. The gods would choose kings and legitimize their rule, and in return kings would ensure that the temples were maintained and the proper offerings made. They would give humanity the me, divine laws and civilized arts. These included not just practical things like agriculture and craft, but also abstract concepts like justice, truth, kingship, priesthood. The me were the fundamental rules by which civilized society operated. Inanna, ambitious goddess that she was, went to Enki's temple in Eridu and tricked him. She got him drunk on beer, and while he was intoxicated, he gave her many of the me. She loaded them into her boat and fled to Uruk, her own city, before Enki realized what had happened. When he sobered up and sent his servants to retrieve the me, Inanna refused. She had won them fairly, she claimed, and Uruk would keep them. Thus the me spread throughout the land. Each city developed its own character, its own expertise. Some became known for their craftsmen, others for their wisdom, others for their military prowess. Kings rose and fell. Dynasties were established and overthrown. Wars were fought between cities. Alliances were made and broken. This was the pattern of human civilization, always changing, always struggling, always building and destroying and building again. The gods watched from their temples, sometimes intervening, sometimes letting events unfold according to human choice. And in this second age there arose heroes, humans who were partly divine, children of gods and mortals who performed great deeds. The most famous of these was Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, son of a goddess and a mortal king. His story would be told and retold, carved on tablets, copied and preserved, until it became the oldest surviving epic in world literature. Let the tale of Gilgamesh carry you deeper into rest. Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. His mother was Ninsun, a goddess of wisdom. His father was Lugalbanda, a mortal king. This made Gilgamesh stronger, faster, wiser than any ordinary human. He was the greatest king Uruk had ever known, but Gilgamesh was also arrogant and oppressive. He exhausted his people with constant building projects. He took young men for his wars and young women for his pleasure. The people of Uruk cried out to the gods for relief from their king's tyranny. The gods heard their prayers. They asked Aruru, the goddess of creation, to make a rival for Gilgamesh, someone strong enough to challenge him, to humble him, to teach him wisdom. Aruru went to the wilderness and gathered clay. She formed a man, wild and strong. She called him Enkidu. Enkidu was not civilized. He lived in the wilderness with the animals. His hair was long and matted. He wore no clothes. He knew nothing of cities or farms or human ways. But he was strong as Gilgamesh, perhaps stronger. The shepherds who saw Enkidu in the hills were frightened. This wild man freed animals from their traps and destroyed their snares. The shepherds reported this to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh devised a plan. He sent a temple priestess, Shamhat, to the wilderness to find Enkidu. Shamhat found the wild man at a watering hole. She revealed herself to him, and for 6 days and 7 nights she taught Enkidu the ways of civilization, language, self-awareness, human culture. When Enkidu tried to return to the animals, they fled from him. He was no longer one of them. He had become human. Shamhat brought Enkidu to Uruk. There, at a wedding feast where Gilgamesh intended to exercise his royal privilege, Enkidu blocked the king's path. "This is wrong," Enkidu said. "You abuse your power." Gilgamesh was enraged. No one challenged the king. The two men fought, wrestling in the streets, each meeting his match for the first time. They were equally strong, equally skilled. Neither could defeat the other, and in that stalemate they became friends. From that day forward, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were inseparable. Brothers in all but blood, the closest of companions. Together they went on adventures. They travelled to the cedar forest and slew Humbaba, the monster who guarded it. They cut down the sacred cedars to bring timber back to Uruk. This deed angered the gods, particularly Enlil, who had appointed Humbaba as guardian. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu were heroes, and heroes must perform great deeds, whatever the consequences. Later, the goddess Inanna desired Gilgamesh. She appeared to him in all her beauty and offered to be his wife. But Gilgamesh, knowing Inanna's history, how she had abandoned or destroyed her previous lovers, refused her. Inanna was furious. Rejected and humiliated, she went to her father Anu and demanded revenge. "Give me the bull of heaven," she said. "I will send it to destroy Uruk and kill Gilgamesh." Anu was reluctant. The bull of heaven was a terrible creature. But Inanna threatened to break down the gates of the underworld and let the dead rise up and devour the living if he refused. So Anu gave her the bull. The bull of heaven descended to Uruk. With each snort of its nostrils, chasms opened in the earth, swallowing hundreds of men. It trampled the fields, destroyed buildings, brought devastation to the city. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought the bull together. Enkidu grabbed its tail while Gilgamesh drove his sword into its neck. They killed the bull of heaven and threw its thigh at Inanna in contempt. The gods were outraged. These mortals, even part divine heroes, had gone too far. They had killed Humbaba, guardian of the sacred forest. They had slain the bull of heaven. They had insulted a goddess. There must be consequences. The gods decreed that one of the two heroes must die. They chose Enkidu. Enkidu fell ill. For 12 days he suffered, growing weaker. He cursed the life he'd been given, cursed Shamhat for bringing him to civilization, cursed the door he had made for Enlil's temple. But Shamhat had also brought him friendship, love, and meaning. Slowly his curses turned to blessings. He forgave everything. On the 12th day, Enkidu died in Gilgamesh's arms. Gilgamesh was devastated. He had never known grief like this. He wept over his friend's body for 7 days and 7 nights, until worms began to fall from Enkidu's nose. Only then did he accept that Enkidu was truly gone. But Gilgamesh could not accept death itself. If Enkidu could die, then so could he. Despite being 2/3 divine, Gilgamesh was still part mortal. One day, he too would die. This thought terrified him. He was Gilgamesh, the great king, the mighty hero. How could he simply cease to exist? He remembered the story of Utnapishtim, the man who had survived the flood and been granted immortality. If Utnapishtim had found eternal life, perhaps Gilgamesh could too. So Gilgamesh set out on the longest, most difficult journey of his life. a quest to find Utnapishtim and learn the secret of eternal life. Close your eyes, breathe deeply. The journey continues, but you are drifting now, peaceful and calm. Gilgamesh travelled far from Uruk, leaving his kingdom behind. He crossed deserts and mountains, facing countless dangers. He was searching for the edge of the world, where Utnapishtim dwelt with his wife in immortal peace. He came to the twin peaks of Mashu, the mountains that guarded the path where the sun travelled beneath the earth each night. The mountains were guarded by scorpion people, beings with the torsos of men and the lower bodies of scorpions. "Who are you, and why do you come here?" they asked. "No mortal has ever passed through these mountains." "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk," he replied. "I seek Utnapishtim the distant, who lives forever. I must learn from him how to escape death." The scorpion people saw his determination and his grief. They allowed him to pass. Gilgamesh entered the tunnel through the mountains. For 12 leagues he walked in absolute darkness, unable to see anything, feeling his way forward. At the 11th league, a glimmer of light appeared ahead. At the 12th league, he emerged into sunlight once more. He found himself in a garden of wonders. The trees bore jewels instead of fruit, lapis lazuli, carnelian, pearls. This was the garden of the gods, a place no mortal should see. There he met Siduri, the divine barmaid who lived at the edge of the world. She was frightened by his appearance. He was wild-looking now, wearing skins, his face burned by the sun. "Why do you look like this?" she asked. "Why do you wander like a wild man?" "I am Gilgamesh," he said. "I have lost my friend Enkidu. Death has taken him, and one day it will take me too. I am searching for Utnapishtim, who lives forever. Can you tell me how to find him?" Siduri looked at him with pity. "The life you are seeking you will not find," she said gently. "When the gods created humanity, they made death part of the human condition. Life and death they allotted together. For humans, there is no eternal life." "But Utnapishtim lives forever," Gilgamesh protested. "Yes," Siduri acknowledged, "but his circumstances were unique. Still, if you must seek him, you must cross the waters of death. Only Urshanabi, the ferryman, can take you across." Gilgamesh found Urshanabi and convinced him to provide passage. Together they crossed the waters of death, waters that would kill any mortal who touched them. Gilgamesh used poles pushing the boat across, discarding each pole after a single push so that no death water would drip back on him. Finally they reached the shore where Utnapishtim dwelt. Utnapishtim looked at Gilgamesh. This king who had travelled so far, suffered so much, all to escape the fate that awaits every mortal. "Why do you strive so?" Utnapishtim asked. "You toil without resting. You fill your days with grief. From the day we're born, death is our destiny. No one can say when their hour will come. The gods alone live forever." But Gilgamesh demanded, "You were mortal once. You lived in a city as I do. Yet now you are immortal. How did this happen? Tell me." So Utnapishtim told him the story of the flood. The same story we heard earlier, about the boat and the rain and the destruction of the world. "The gods granted me immortality as a special reward," Utnapishtim concluded. "But who will assemble the gods for you? Who will advocate for you to receive this same gift?" Gilgamesh realized the truth. His quest was futile. Utnapishtim's immortality was unique, a one-time exception. There was no path to eternal life for him. But Utnapishtim, seeing Gilgamesh's despair, took pity on him. "There is a plant," Utnapishtim said, "that grows at the bottom of the cosmic ocean. It is called the old man becomes young again. If you can retrieve this plant, you can restore your youth, though not achieve true immortality. Each time you grow old, you could eat of it and become young again." It was something, at least. Gilgamesh tied stones to his feet and sank to the bottom of the ocean. He found the plant thorny and difficult to grasp, but he seized it despite the pain and returned to the surface. He began his journey home, carrying the plant carefully. He had not gained immortality, but he had gained the power to renew his youth. It was more than any other mortal possessed. But on the journey, Gilgamesh stopped at a pool to bathe. He set the plant down on the shore. A serpent, attracted by the plant's fragrance, emerged from the water and swallowed it. Immediately the serpent shed its skin, made young again by the plant's power. And then it slithered away, disappearing into the wilderness. Gilgamesh sat down and wept. He had travelled so far, endured so much, and now the one thing he had gained was lost. The serpent had stolen the gift of renewal. This is why snakes shed their skins and seem to become young again, while humans must age and die. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed. He had failed in his quest. Death would claim him, as it claims all mortals, but something had changed. As he approached his city, he looked at its walls, its gates, its temples. He saw the city he had built, the civilization he had fostered, and he understood. Immortality was impossible, but legacy was not. He would die, but Uruk would endure. His deeds would be remembered. His story would be told. In that, there was a kind of life beyond death, not for his body, but for his name, his achievements, his impact on the world. Gilgamesh entered Uruk and lived out the rest of his days as a wise and just king. When he died, all of Uruk mourned. They buried him with honours, and his name was remembered forever, carved on tablets, passed down through generations, surviving thousands of years. The story of Gilgamesh is the story of humanity, the struggle to accept our mortality, the search for meaning in a finite life, the understanding that our legacy is what lives on after we're gone. You're so peaceful now, so relaxed. The ancient story continues, soft as a dream. There was another tale of mortality and immortality, gentler than Gilgamesh's story, but no less profound. This was the tale of Adapa, the wise man of Eridu. Adapa was a priest of Enki, serving in the temple of the Eabzu. He was the wisest of all humans, for Enki had given him understanding of all things, the workings of the world, the nature of the gods, the secrets of existence. But Enki had not given him eternal life. Each day, Adapa would go out on the waters to catch fish for the temple offerings. He was a good sailor, respectful of the sea, careful and skilled. One day, as he was fishing, the south wind rose up suddenly and violently. The wind capsized his boat, throwing Adapa into the water. Angry and frustrated, Adapa cursed the south wind. "You have broken my boat," he shouted. "For this I will break your wing." And such was Adapa's power, given to him by Enki, that the words became reality. The south wind's wing was broken, and for 7 days the south wind could not blow. Anu, the sky god, noticed this from his palace in heaven. "What has happened to the south wind?" he asked. "Why does it not blow?" His vizier replied, "Adapa, son of Ea, has broken the south wind's wing." Anu was angered by this mortal's presumption. "Bring Adapa before me," he commanded. "He must answer for this offence." Enki learned that his priest was being summoned to heaven. He knew this was dangerous. Mortals were not meant to enter the divine realm. He called Adapa and gave him instructions. "You are going to appear before Anu," Enki said. "When you arrive at the gates of heaven, you will see 2 guards, Tammuz and Gizida. They are friendly to me. Greet them respectfully, and they will speak well of you to Anu. When you stand before Anu, he will be angry at first, but if you explain honestly what happened, his anger will turn to respect for your wisdom. He will offer you the bread of death and the water of death. Do not eat or drink them. They will kill you. Refuse politely, and you will be allowed to return home safely." Adapa thanked Enki and ascended to heaven. Everything happened as Enki had predicted. The guards greeted him kindly. When he explained to Anu why he had broken the south wind's wing, Anu's anger faded, replaced by admiration for this wise mortal. "You are indeed wise," Anu said. "It is rare to find such understanding in a human. As a gesture of honour, I offer you a gift." He had his servants bring bread and water. But these were not the bread and water of death that Enki had warned about. Anu had been so impressed by Adapa that he had decided to offer him something far greater. The bread of life and the water of life, which would make him immortal. Adapa, however, remembered Enki's warning. When offered the bread and water, he politely refused. "I cannot accept," he said. Anu was surprised. "You refuse the gift of immortality." "My lord Enki instructed me not to eat or drink anything in heaven," Adapa explained. Anu laughed. Oh, a bitter laugh. "Enki has tricked you, Adapa. What I offered you was eternal life, not death. You could have become like the gods, immortal and powerful. But you have refused, and the offer cannot be made twice. You will return to Earth and live out your mortal life." Adapa realized what he had lost. Through no fault of his own, merely by following his god's instructions, he had missed the chance for immortality. "Why did Enki tell you to refuse?" Anu mused. "Perhaps he knew that I would offer you immortality. Perhaps he wanted to keep immortality for the gods alone. Or perhaps he knew that immortality is not truly a gift for mortals. That to live forever while all you love dies around you is actually a curse." Adapa returned to Earth, mortal as before. He served in Enki's temple for the rest of his days. He was the wisest of humans, but wisdom had not brought him eternal life. The tale of Adapa taught that the gods make decisions mortals cannot fully understand. Sometimes what seems like a gift is a curse. Sometimes what seems like a loss is actually protection. And mortality, while painful, is part of what makes human life meaningful. The story drifts like smoke, like water, like the breath that carries you into deeper sleep. We return now to Inanna, goddess of love and war, of the morning star and the evening star, she who is bold and beautiful, fierce and passionate, never satisfied with what she has, always seeking more. Inanna looked down from her heavenly palace in Uruk and thought of her sister Ereshkigal, who ruled the underworld, the realm of death, the place where all mortals eventually go, where they exist as shadows, eating dust and clay, never seeing light again. "I will visit my sister," Inanna decided. "I will descend to the underworld and see her realm for myself." Her advisor Ninshubur warned her, "My lady, no one returns from the underworld. It is the place of no return. If you go there, you may not come back." "I must go," Inanna insisted. "But you are right to be cautious. If I have not returned in 3 days, go to the gods and beg them to rescue me. Go first to Enlil, then to Nanna, then to Enki. One of them will help." Inanna adorned herself in all her divine powers, the 7 me that made her who she was. She wore her crown, the symbol of her sovereignty. She wore lapis lazuli beads around her neck. She wore a breastplate. She wore a golden ring. She wore a measuring rod and line. She wore a royal robe. She carried a staff. Each represented an aspect of her power and identity. Thus adorned, she descended to the underworld. She came to the first gate. The gatekeeper stopped her. "Who are you, and why do you come to the land of no return?" he asked. "I am Inanna, Queen of Heaven," she replied. "I come to attend the funeral of my sister's husband." This was a lie. There was no funeral, but the gatekeeper opened the gate. However, he said, "You must remove your crown. Such are the rules of the underworld." Inanna removed her crown and passed through. At the second gate, she had to remove her lapis beads. At the third gate, her breastplate. At the fourth, her ring. At the fifth, her measuring rod and line. At the sixth, her royal robe. At the 7th and final gate, her staff. She stood naked and powerless before her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. Ereshkigal looked at Inanna with eyes full of fury. "You dare come to my realm? You who have everything, beauty, love, worship, power. You dare to enter the realm of death and dust." The judges of the underworld, the 7 Anunnaki who presided over death, fixed their eyes on Inanna. Their gaze was the gaze of death itself. Inanna died. Her corpse was hung on a hook on the wall, like a piece of meat, and there it remained. 3 days passed. When Inanna did not return, Ninshubur did as she'd been instructed. She went to Enlil and begged him to save Inanna. Inanna descended to the underworld of her own will, Enlil said. She knew the risks. I will not interfere with the laws of death. Ninshubur went to Nanna, the moon god. Please save your daughter Inanna. But Nanna gave the same answer. She chose to descend. She must face the consequences. Finally, Ninshubur came to Enki, god of wisdom and magic. Enki was troubled by the news. Inanna is trapped in the underworld, he said. This is indeed dire, but I have a plan. Enki scraped dirt from beneath his fingernails and created 2 beings, neither male nor female, neither living nor dead. He gave them the food and water of life and sent them to the underworld. These creatures slipped through the gates unseen, too small and insignificant to be noticed. They found Ereshkigal in her palace, moaning in pain. She was suffering the pangs of childbirth, though no child would come. The 2 creatures from Enki comforted her, sympathizing with her pain. No one had ever shown Ereshkigal compassion before. All feared her, all avoided her, all associated her only with death and misery. But these creatures understood her suffering. Grateful, Ereshkigal asked, "What gift can I give you to repay your kindness?" "We ask only for the corpse that hangs on the wall," they said. Ereshkigal, bound by her word, gave them Inanna's body. They sprinkled it with the food and water of life, and Inanna revived. She rose, restored to life. But the laws of the underworld are absolute. No one can leave without providing a substitute. Someone must take Inanna's place. Inanna ascended through the 7 gates, reclaiming her powers at each one. She returned to the surface, to the world of light and life. Demons from the underworld followed her, waiting to see who she would choose as her substitute. They passed through the cities. Her loyal servant Ninshubur prostrated herself before Inanna. "Surely not her," Inanna said. "She tried to save me." They came to Uruk, to Inanna's own palace. There sat her husband Dumuzi, dressed in fine robes, sitting on Inanna's throne, seemingly unconcerned that she had been gone. Inanna's eyes blazed with fury. "He shows no grief. He does not mourn my absence. Take him!" The demons seized Dumuzi and began dragging him to the underworld. Dumuzi ran, crying out to Utu, the sun god, to help him. Utu turned Dumuzi into a gazelle so he could escape, but the demons pursued. Finally, Dumuzi's sister Geshtinana intervened. She loved her brother so much that she volunteered to take his place in the underworld. A compromise was reached. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld and half the year above. When he was below, it would be the dry season, when plants wither and die. When he returned, it would be the wet season, when everything bloomed and grew. Thus the changing seasons were explained. Death and rebirth, loss and return, the eternal cycle of nature. Inanna had returned from death itself, but at a great cost, and the world had gained its rhythm of seasons, the pattern of death and renewal that would continue forever. Rest now. Let the ancient rhythms of the story carry you into dreams. For long ages, the Anunnaki ruled over the earth and its peoples. Each god had their domain, their city, their sphere of influence. Anu remained in highest heaven, distant and majestic, the final authority but rarely involved in day-to-day affairs. Enlil commanded from Nippur, maintaining order, ensuring that the laws were followed, that chaos did not overwhelm cosmos. Enki worked from his temple in Eridu, solving problems, teaching humanity new skills, mediating between the other gods, always thinking, always creating. Ninhursag oversaw births and the health of mothers and children. She was honoured in all the cities, for without her blessing families could not grow. Nanna, the moon god, marked time from his temple in Ur. The calendar followed his movements across the sky, and farmers planted and harvested according to his cycles. Utu, the sun god, brought light and justice. He saw everything beneath the sun and judged accordingly. Inanna ruled in Uruk, goddess of love and desire, of warfare and sovereignty. She was passionate and unpredictable, but her worship was fervent and widespread. Ninurta, god of war and hunting, was the champion of the gods, defeating monsters and defending order against chaos. Nergal ruled the underworld alongside Ereshkigal. He was associated with plague and war, the violent aspects of death. There were so many others: Nisaba, goddess of writing and accounting; Nidaba, goddess of grain; Ningish Zida, god of the tree of life; Dumuzi, the shepherd god; Era, god of pestilence; Ishkur, god of storms. Each had their own stories, their own relationships, their own worshippers. The temples were magnificent, reaching toward heaven. The ziggurat of Ur still partially stands today, a testament to the architectural achievement of ancient Sumer. These were not just buildings, but cosmic mountains, places where heaven and earth met, where the divine and mortal realms touched. The priests performed daily rituals, ensuring that the gods were fed, clothed, honoured. The offerings were elaborate: bread, beer, dates, meat, incense. The gods were treated as living presences, residing in their statues, participating in the life of the city. Festivals marked the year. The New Year celebration in Babylon, the Akitu festival, lasted 12 days. It included rituals, processions, public ceremonies, and dramatic reenactments of the creation myth. The king would participate, symbolically renewing his divine mandate to rule. In all of this, humanity and the Anunnaki lived in a relationship, not equal, but cooperative. Humans served, but they also received blessings. The gods needed worship, offerings, temples. Humans needed divine protection, favourable weather, fertility for crops and families. This was the social contract of ancient Mesopotamia. Serve the gods and prosper. Honour them, and they will honour you. Forget them, and chaos will return. Breathe slowly now, peacefully. The ancient world is peaceful in this moment, balanced and ordered, but nothing lasts forever, not even the gods. As centuries became millennia, as dynasties rose and fell, as empires grew and crumbled, the worship of the Anunnaki gradually changed and eventually faded. New peoples came to Mesopotamia, bringing new gods. The Assyrians emphasized Asher, their national god. The Babylonians elevated Marduk, who absorbed the attributes of many older gods, including Enlil's position as executive deity. The old stories were rewritten, adapted, changed. The creation myths were altered to place Marduk at the centre, as the one who defeated Tiamat and created the world. The older gods became less important, reduced to supporting roles in narratives that had once centred on them. Then came the Persians, conquering Babylon in 539 BCE, bringing their own religion, Zoroastrianism, with its focus on Ahura Mazda and the cosmic battle between good and evil. Then came Alexander the Great and the Greeks, bringing their pantheon, Zeus, Athena, Apollo, who were different in character and worship from the old Mesopotamian gods. Then came the Romans, the Parthians, the Sassanids, one empire after another, each with their own religious traditions. And finally came new faiths, Christianity spreading from the West, Islam spreading from Arabia. These were monotheistic religions, recognizing only one god, rejecting the old pantheons entirely. The temples fell into disuse, the rituals ceased, the priests died without successors, the offering stopped. The clay tablets that recorded the myths were buried in ruins, forgotten, lost to time. For nearly 2,000 years the Anunnaki were forgotten. The cities where they had been worshipped crumbled into dust. Ur, Uruk, Eridu, Nippur all became mounds of earth, anonymous ruins in the desert, their stories lost. But the tablets remained, buried under sand and time, and one day they would be found again, sleep deeper now. The ancient gods sleep too, waiting in the earth. In the 19th century, European archaeologists and adventurers came to Mesopotamia. They were searching for evidence of the biblical world, for proof of the stories told in the Old Testament. They found something far more ancient. In 1849, Austin Henry Layard excavated the ancient Assyrian city of Nineveh. He found libraries, rooms filled with clay tablets covered in cuneiform writing, tens of thousands of them. Other archaeologists followed. They excavated Uruk, Babylon, Nippur, Lagash. Everywhere they dug, they found tablets, ancient records, laws, contracts, hymns, prayers and stories. But for years, no one could read them. Cuneiform had been a dead language for 1500 years. The knowledge of how to read it had been lost. Then, in the 1850s, scholars began to crack the code. They used the Behistun inscription, a trilingual text carved into a cliff in Persia, written in Old Persian, Elamite and Akkadian. By comparing the three versions, they gradually learned to read cuneiform, and once they could read it, the ancient world came alive again. George Smith, working in the British Museum, was translating tablets from Nineveh when he came across a story that shocked him. It was an account of a great flood similar to the biblical story of Noah's Ark, but this version was older, much older, carved on tablets that predated the Bible by over 1,000 years. This was the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the flood story featured Utnapishtim, not Noah. The biblical flood narrative had a predecessor, a source, an earlier version from which it might have been derived or with which it shared common origins. The discovery caused a sensation. If the Bible stories had older parallels in pagan myths, what did that mean? The question challenged traditional understanding of scripture and history. More tablets were translated. The creation myths emerged, the stories of An and Ki, of Enlil and Enki, of the creation of humanity. The story of Inanna's descent to the underworld was pieced together. The tale of Adapa was reconstructed. The Anunnaki were named in the texts as a group of gods, powerful and important, though their exact nature remained somewhat mysterious, because the texts were often fragmentary and the references varied. Scholars recognise that these weren't primitive myths, but sophisticated theological and philosophical narratives. They dealt with profound questions. Why do we exist? Why do we die? What is the relationship between the divine and the mortal? How should we live? The Sumerians and Babylonians had created a complex mythology to answer these questions, just as the Greeks, Egyptians, Norse and others had done. The Anunnaki, once forgotten, were known to scholars again, but they were understood in their proper context, as deities from an ancient polytheistic religion, not as historical figures but as mythological beings. For most of the 20th century, that's how they were seen by academics. Important for understanding ancient, religion and culture but purely mythological. Then something changed. You're so relaxed now, so peaceful. The story is almost complete. Let it finish as you drift away. In 1976, a book was published that would change how millions of people thought about the Anunnaki. The book was called The 12th Planet, and its author was Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin proposed a revolutionary and controversial theory. What if the Anunnaki were not gods in the mythological sense, but ancient astronauts? What if they were an advanced alien race who came to Earth from another planet? According to Sitchin's interpretation, the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, which he claimed was a large planet in our solar system, with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it close to Earth every 3,600 years. Sitchin suggested that the Anunnaki came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago, searching for gold, which they needed to repair their planet's atmosphere. They established colonies in Mesopotamia and began mining operations. Initially, the Anunnaki themselves did the labour, but the work was hard, and they grew tired, just as the myths described. So, according to Sitchin, they decided to create a worker species by genetically engineering primitive hominids that already existed on Earth, upgrading them to create modern humans, Homo sapiens. This, Sitchin argued, explain the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens in the archaeological record, our rapid development compared to other species, and the stories in Genesis about God creating man in his image. The myths about Enki creating humans from clay, that was a metaphorical description of genetic engineering. The stories about gods having children with humans, those were accounts of actual interbreeding between aliens and primitive humans, creating hybrid offspring. Sitchin reinterpreted every Sumerian myth through this lens: the separation of heaven and earth, the arrival of the alien ships, the flood, a natural disaster that the Anunnaki knew was coming but chose not to warn humans about, except for Enki, who secretly told Utnapishtim to build a boat. He claimed that ancient monuments like the pyramids, Stonehenge, and others were built with Anunnaki technology or guidance. He suggested that the Anunnaki remained on Earth for thousands of years, ruling as God's kings, before eventually leaving, promising to return. Sitchin's books became bestsellers. Millions of readers found his theories fascinating. Here was an explanation for ancient mysteries, for the origins of humanity, for the existence of ancient civilizations that seemed too advanced for their time. The idea spread. Other authors built on Sitchin's work, adding their own theories. The Anunnaki became central figures in alternative history, in ancient astronaut theory, in speculation about alien intervention in human development. Television shows were made, documentaries produced, websites created, all exploring the possibility that the Anunnaki were real extraterrestrial beings who shaped human history. But mainstream scholars and scientists strongly disagreed with these interpretations. Assyriologists, scholars who specialize in ancient Mesopotamian languages and cultures, have consistently rejected Sitchin's theories. Their criticisms include translation errors. Scholars who can read Sumerian and Akkadian have pointed out numerous errors in Sitchin's translations. He often mistranslated words or took them out of context to support his theories. For example, the Sumerian word for sky or heaven, An, does not mean planet as Sitchin claimed. Planet Nibiru. Astronomers have found no evidence for a large planet with the orbit Sitchin described. Such a planet would have gravitational effects on other planets that we would be able to detect. Despite searches, no such planet has been found. Ancient astronomy. The ancient Mesopotamians were skilled astronomers, but they did not have the astronomical knowledge that Sitchin attributed to them. They knew of 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, plus the Sun and Moon, which they counted as celestial objects. This gives 7, not the 12 that Sitchin claimed. Archaeological context. The archaeological and genetic evidence for human evolution doesn't support the idea of sudden genetic engineering 300,000 years ago. The fossil record shows a gradual evolution of hominids over millions of years, with Homo sapiens emerging around 300,000 years ago through natural evolutionary processes. Mythological interpretation. The myths make sense within their cultural and religious context without needing to invoke aliens. Ancient peoples created mythologies to explain their world, establish social order, and explore philosophical questions. These were religious and literary texts, not historical or scientific documents. Cherry-picking evidence. Critics note that Sitchin and his followers tend to select only the evidence that supports their theories while ignoring contradictory evidence. They also often rely on translations of translations rather than original texts. The scholarly consensus remains that the Anunnaki were mythological deities, that the Sumerian and Babylonian myths were religious and literary expressions of ancient peoples trying to understand their world, and that there is no credible evidence for ancient astronauts. But the debate continues. Believers in the ancient astronaut theory argue that mainstream academics are closed-minded, that they refuse to consider evidence that challenges established paradigms, that there are mysteries about ancient civilizations that conventional archaeology cannot explain. Skeptics respond that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence for ancient astronauts is not convincing when examined closely. The truth, whatever it is, remains contested. Your breathing is so slow now, so deep, you are on the edge of sleep. Just a little more of the story. Perhaps the question of whether the Anunnaki were literal aliens misses something important. Perhaps what matters most is what the myths meant to the people who told them, and what they can mean to us today. The ancient Sumerians and Babylonians lived in a harsh environment. The land between the rivers could be incredibly fertile, but it required constant work, building and maintaining irrigation canals, defending against floods, dealing with droughts, fighting off invaders. Their lives were hard. They worked from dawn to dusk. They faced disease, war, infant mortality, early death. They had no scientific understanding of why things happened, why crops failed, why plagues came, why earthquakes shook the ground. So they created stories to make sense of it all. The gods represented the forces of nature and society, the sky, the storm, the waters, the earth, fertility, war, love, death. By personifying these forces as beings with personalities and desires, the ancients made them comprehensible, relatable. The myths also encoded wisdom about how to live. The story of Gilgamesh teaches that death is inevitable, but legacy endures, that friendship is precious, that hubris leads to downfall. The story of the flood teaches about divine justice, but also divine mercy. The story of Inanna's descent teaches about death and rebirth, about the cycles of nature, about the cost of power. These weren't just entertaining stories, they were sacred texts, philosophical treatises, psychological explorations. They dealt with the fundamental questions of human existence, and perhaps they still have value today, not as literal history or science, but as wisdom literature. What can we learn from the Anunnaki myths? The complexity of the divine. The Mesopotamian gods were not all good or all evil. They were complex, sometimes contradictory, capable of both compassion and cruelty. This might reflect a more nuanced understanding of divinity and morality than simple dualism allows. The relationship between power and responsibility. The gods created humans to serve them, but they also had to care for creation. Power creates obligations. This is a theme that resonates in discussions of leadership, governance, and authority. The inevitability of death. Multiple myths deal with the attempt to escape death. Gilgamesh, Adapa, Inanna. All teach that death is part of the human condition, that immortality is not achievable, or perhaps not even desirable, and that we must find meaning within our mortal lives. The value of wisdom. Enki, god of wisdom, is consistently portrayed as the helper of humanity, the solver of problems, the one who finds creative solutions. The myths value intelligence, cleverness, and knowledge. The cycles of nature. Many myths explain seasonal changes, agricultural cycles, the movements of celestial bodies. They reflect an understanding that nature operates in patterns, that death leads to rebirth, that endings are also beginnings. Whether we interpret these myths literally or metaphorically, historically or symbolically, as records of alien contact or as products of human imagination, they remain powerful stories that have resonated across 5,000 years. The Anunnaki, whether gods or aliens or metaphors, represent humanity's oldest attempt to answer the biggest questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's what makes them worth remembering, worth studying, worth retelling as you drift off to sleep tonight. Close your eyes now. Let the ancient story rest. Let your mind rest. Let your body rest. And so we come to the end of the story of the Anunnaki, though like all good stories, it has no true ending. The myths continue to evolve, to be reinterpreted, to spark new questions and theories. The clay tablets that preserve these stories for 5,000 years still exist, housed in museums around the world. New tablets are still being discovered, still being translated. Our understanding of the ancient world continues to grow. The cities where the Anunnaki were worshipped have been excavated. You can visit the ruins of Ur, walk through the remains of ancient Uruk, see the foundation stones of temples where offerings were made to gods whose names were old before the Bible was written. The myths themselves have entered our collective consciousness, whether we know it or not. Elements of Mesopotamian mythology influenced the Bible, which influenced Western civilization. The flood story, the creation narrative, ideas about divine law and justice, all have ancient Mesopotamian predecessors or parallels. And in our modern age, the Anunnaki have been reborn as figures of speculation, as potential evidence of ancient astronauts, as subjects of alternative history. Whether this is profound truth or creative fiction depends on what you choose to believe, but tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, you're simply drifting, peaceful and calm, as the ancient story washes over you like a gentle river, carrying you into sleep. The Anunnaki, gods, aliens or myths, have done what good stories do. They have taken us on a journey, made us think, given us something to wonder about as we transition from waking to dreaming. So sleep now. Dream of ancient cities and divine beings. Dream of the first humans opening their eyes for the first time. Dream of floods and heroes, descents to the underworld and returns to life. The Anunnaki watch over your sleep, whether they exist or not, whether they're near or far, whether they were real or merely stories told under starlight 5,000 years ago. Sleep peacefully. The story is complete. The ancient world rests, and so do you. Good night.